Every great hospital has a secret, a ledger of deaths, of last breaths, and of pain too intense to dissipate. We are told these places are empty, but the residual energy of trauma is a powerful, dark force. Across Australia, from the dusty plains of Riverton to the wet fog of Launceston, the patience and the suffering never truly left. Tonight, we check in. One, Goodna Mental Asylum, Wolston Park Hospital, Queensland. In the heart of Queensland, where the Brisbane River carves its path, lies a place of profound sorrow, established long ago as the Gowrie Lunatic Asylum in 1865. Though its name changed to the stigmatized Goodna Asylum for the insane, and later to Wolston Park Hospital, the shadow of its past refused to lift. This was not a place of pure healing. It was a dumping ground for the destitute, the mentally ill, and in a truly dark chapter from the 1960s to the 1980s, even for children, wards of the state deemed difficult. Before the hauntings began, the institution's history was a catalogue of institutionalized abuse. Children, sometimes incorrectly diagnosed, were isolated, placed with adult patients, and subjected to horrific treatments, sexual assault, chemical restraint, and electric shock therapy. The locked wards, such as Pierce House for males and Osler House for women, were reportedly brutal and housed convicted violent offenders alongside the vulnerable. An apology was eventually issued to the survivors in 2010, acknowledging the state's failure to protect them. The ground itself is now steeped in trauma, with a nearby cemetery holding an unmarked mass grave of hundreds of former patients. This history of suffering paved the way for the haunting. The residual energy of pain and injustice has manifested in countless chilling encounters. Visitors and former staff have reported hearing the disembodied cries and whimpers of children echoing from empty corridors and wards, particularly from the older buildings. There are frequent sightings of shadow figures darting between the trees on the sprawling grounds, often described as fleeting glimpses of patients who died alone. Perhaps the most distressing paranormal evidence surrounds the cemetery. Here, where hundreds of souls were interred without a name or marker, investigators have captured electronic voice phenomena, EVP, distorted, whispered voices pleading or crying out for help. Some claim to have seen spectral figures wandering the burial site, believed to be the forgotten patients restless in their unmarked graves, their spirits anchored by the indignity and suffering of their lives and deaths within the asylum's cold sandstone walls. The sheer weight of historical trauma here creates a palpable oppression, a heavy, silent presence that follows you long after you leave. Two, Gladesville Mental Hospital, New South Wales. Along the tranquil banks of the Parramatta River in New South Wales, the convict-built sandstone walls of Gladesville Mental Hospital, originally the Tarban Creek Lunatic Asylum from 1838, belie a history of immense confinement and suffering. For over 160 years, it was Sydney's primary institution for the insane, a place notorious for overcrowding, harsh conditions, and early treatments that included chains and isolation. Despite periods of reform aimed at compassionate care, the stigma and sorrow never truly left. The history before its full recognition as haunted is a long, dark shadow. Over 1,000 former patients lie in unmarked graves at the Gladesville Hospital Cemetery, a poignant testament to the societal shame and neglect associated with mental illness in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The scale of death and the anonymity of the burials charged the grounds with a profound sadness. The hospital closed in 1998, leaving behind a legacy of both desperate lives and forgotten deaths. The spectral activity is as pervasive as the building's historical footprint. A chilling encounter frequently reported is the overwhelming feeling of heaviness, despair, or being weighed down upon entering the older parts of the grounds. People walking through the precinct have reported seeing visionary figures, ghostly shapes moving in their peripheral vision near the old buildings, often described as indistinct forms of patients in long gowns, only to vanish when looked at directly. One particularly intense incident involves a former share house on the property where residents experienced severe activity. They spoke of seeing figures on the stairs who weren't there and being haunted by the same recurring figures in their nightmares. An especially malevolent spirit is rumored to reside in a pantry area, where a paranormal investigator was said to have been subjected to a sudden, frightening burst of energy, feeling an intense, close presence, and hearing two clear, audible footsteps inside the tiny, empty space. A clear sign the past residents remained bound to their painful domain. Three, Prince Henry Hospital, Little Bay Hospital, New South Wales. Prince Henry Hospital, formerly the Coast Hospital at Little Bay in New South Wales, holds a unique and grim history distinct from the asylums. Established in 1881, its mission was to isolate and treat patients suffering from infectious diseases, particularly smallpox, bubonic plague, and leprosy. This necessity meant many patients faced prolonged, agonizing isolation in a remote location, fearing death and the social rejection that came with their disease. The hospital was often the last place a patient would ever see their loved ones. Before it became a site for ghost tours, its early history centered on the lazaret, a dedicated area for lepers, including Chinese and indigenous patients, often housed in self-contained cottages by the sea. While records speak of efforts to provide a pleasant environment, the forced confinement, the fear of contagion, and the high rate of mortality left a deep emotional scar on the land. The lonely, desolate cemetery holds the remains of many who died from these devastating illnesses, far from the city. The hospital was gradually repurposed and ultimately closed in 2003, with parts of the original site becoming a museum. The paranormal activity at Prince Henry is often linked to one famous, lingering presence, Gracie's ghost. This spirit is widely believed to be Sister Grace Andrews, a nurse from the hospital's earlier days. She is described as a mischievous, but generally friendly, resident spirit. Staff and visitors have reported inexplicable occurrences, such as lights flickering on and off in the museum and surrounding buildings, and objects mysteriously moving or disappearing only to reappear later. Four, Gowrie House, former nurses' home at Royal Brisbane Hospital, Queensland. Gowrie House, once an integral part of the sprawling Royal Brisbane Hospital in Queensland, served a vital purpose as a nurses' home, built to house the dedicated women who cared for the sick. This historic establishment and the surrounding hospital precinct is a site where countless hours of exhaustion, stress, life, and death were concentrated. The hospital itself was the scene of thousands of medical procedures, recoveries, and, inevitably, the passing of life. The history of the Royal Brisbane Hospital is one of intense medical activity and high mortality in the early days, creating a dense reservoir of energy. The nurses living in Gowrie House often dealt with the emotional fallout of witnessing death daily, bringing that intensity back to their living quarters. While Gowrie House itself was a residence, its proximity to the wards and the emotional weight carried by its inhabitants have made it a focal point for residual haunting. Though specific historical accounts about Gowrie House before it was considered haunted are scarce, the sheer volume of trauma in the wider hospital complex provides the chilling backdrop. The paranormal incidents here are often centered around the spirits of former patients and occasionally the exhausted nurses themselves. Staff in the wider old section of the hospital have reported disembodied voices and phantom footsteps echoing down empty corridors late at night. One frequently reported phenomenon is the sound of buzzers and call bells going off in empty rooms, seemingly summoning nurses to non-existent spectral patients. Layered, distorted EVP whispers present. In Gowrie House and the older wards, nurses have reported feeling a sudden, icy presence or a rush of air in closed-off rooms, particularly near areas known for tragic deaths. There are stories of an elderly male figure seen sitting patiently in various lounges, believed to be the ghost of a man waiting for his wife, who may have been a nurse or a long-term patient. One particularly vivid account describes a nurse being terrorized by a malevolent, wispy spirit while attempting to rest, highlighting the unsettling residual energy of stress and death that clings to the historic structure. 5. New Norfolk Hospital for the Insane, Willow Court Asylum, Tasmania. Deep in the Derwent Valley of Tasmania, the New Norfolk Hospital for the Insane, famously known as Willow Court Asylum, is a chilling landmark, Australia's oldest continuously run mental institution, dating back to 1827. Over its nearly 200-year history, under various names including Lachlan Park Hospital and Royal Derwent Hospital, it housed thousands of patients, not just those with mental illness, but also people with intellectual disabilities and, in its early days, convicts. The history of the site is one of prolonged, often barbaric confinement and experimentation. Wards like the Gentleman's Cottage and the Ladies' Cottage had notorious reputations. The patients, many institutionalized for life, were subject to the changing and often cruel trends in mental health treatment for nearly 2 centuries. The infamous J Ward for maximum security disabled adult women and the extensive use of isolation created an immeasurable pool of human suffering and despair. The asylum closed in 2000, leaving its stone buildings as silent witnesses to countless lost lives. The paranormal reputation of Willow Court is legendary, drawing serious paranormal investigators from across the globe. The activity is extreme and often aggressive. Numerous reports document full-bodied apparitions of former patients, shuffling figures in old clothes seen wandering the desolate grounds, particularly in the barracks precinct. One of the most terrifying and frequently cited phenomena is the intense physical interaction experienced by visitors. People have reported being pushed, scratched, or grabbed by unseen forces, a sign of residual anger and malevolence. Disembodied voices and screams are commonly captured on audio recordings during investigations, often sounding distressed and angry. The intense cold feeling and sense of absolute terror reported within the old J Ward are so palpable that even skeptics find themselves unsettled. The residual psychic energy here is so strong, it's widely considered one of the most authentically and violently haunted locations in all of Australia. Six. Bendigo Hospital, Old Section, Victoria. The old section of Bendigo Hospital in Victoria is a structure steeped in the history of a rapidly expanding gold rush town. Established in the mid-19th century, it was a crucial, often overwhelmed facility treating the influx of injured miners, the desperately poor, and victims of widespread diseases like typhoid and consumption. This original building witnessed a non-stop cycle of trauma, urgent medical procedures, and tragically, a high volume of unexpected deaths, creating a deeply imprinted atmosphere of suffering. Before it gained its haunted reputation, the hospital's history was characterized by intense, cramped medical care. The early wards were often overwhelmed, and treatment options were primitive by modern standards. The sheer volume of sudden, painful deaths within the building, from workplace accidents in the mines to epidemic diseases, created an environment where strong, residual emotional energy was guaranteed to linger. Though the hospital has undergone numerous upgrades and additions, the oldest sections retain this heavy, melancholic atmosphere. The paranormal accounts here are primarily focused on the echoes of the Gold Rush era. Staff who have worked in the older wings of the hospital have reported the frequent sound of a gurney being pushed along empty hallways late at night, often accompanied by the subtle smell of disinfectant and ether, a phantom sensory experience linked to the early days of surgery. One of the most persistent reports centers on the spirit of a nurse, often seen in a distinctive, old-fashioned uniform, floating silently through the corridors. She is sometimes seen leaning over empty beds, as if still tending to patients long departed. More chillingly, there are accounts of disembodied whispers and calls for help emanating from empty patient rooms, as well as doors locking and unlocking themselves. These incidents suggest that the spirits of both the dedicated caregivers and the suffering patients remain bound to the hospital's original foundation, forever caught in their cycle of duty and demise. 7. The Old Geelong Hospital, former building, Victoria. In Victoria, overlooking the bay, the Old Geelong Hospital building stands as a powerful monument to the city's past suffering. Dating back to the mid-19th century, this imposing structure served as the principal hospital for the Geelong region for many decades. Like many hospitals of its time, It was a place where groundbreaking medical advances mixed with high mortality rates, particularly among children and victims of serious accidents and illnesses. The history of the site before the ghost stories took hold is marked by a deep sense of community service and quiet tragedy. Generations of Geelong residents were born, treated, and passed away within these walls. The older wards, built during a time when sanitation and surgical techniques were still rudimentary, housed countless patients who died painful, drawn-out deaths. The sheer emotional intensity of medical emergencies and grieving families soaked into the very mortar of the building, preparing it for its haunted future. The facility was eventually vacated as modern infrastructure replaced the old. The accounts of paranormal activity at the old Geelong Hospital are vivid and consistent. A widely reported entity is the ghost of a child, often described as a young boy or girl, seen or heard playing and running in the empty corridors, particularly near the former children's wards. Staff and security personnel have reported hearing tiny, playful giggles and the sound of a bouncing ball when no children were present. Another frightening encounter centers on the hospital's old maternity ward. Witnesses have reported hearing the terrifying sound of a baby crying inconsolably, only to find the room empty, perhaps the echo of a lost infant or a distressed mother. The most aggressive reports involve a malevolent female presence near the old surgical theater, believed to be a patient who died during a failed procedure. Investigators have reported sudden temperature drops and feelings of intense, targeted dread in this area, suggesting not all the spirits here are benign, and some remain consumed by the agony of their final moments. Eight. Maitland Hospital, Old Building, New South Wales. Maitland Hospital in New South Wales has a long and complex history, with the oldest sections dating back to the mid-1800s. Serving the Hunter Valley region, this hospital dealt with everything from severe industrial and farming accidents to devastating outbreaks of infectious disease. As a result, the old building accumulated a massive amount of residual energy from sudden trauma, prolonged illness, and the grief of the families who kept vigil there. The history of the old Maitland Hospital is a cycle of life-saving measures and inevitable loss. Being the primary medical center for a large regional area, its wards were frequently pushed to their limits, particularly during periods of disease outbreaks or mining disasters. The emotional strain on both staff and patients was immense, leading to a deep psychic footprint on the original structure. As the hospital expanded and modern wings were built, the older sections fell quiet, making the residual noise and activity of the past even more pronounced. The haunting incidents at the old Maitland Hospital are some of the most frequently reported in the state. One of the most famous encounters involves the appearance of a woman in a white uniform, believed to be a strict nurse from the 1930s. She is often seen wandering the top floors of the old wing, sometimes pausing to look out the windows. Staff have reported feeling a sudden, unnerving sense of being watched or judged when passing through the corridors she frequents. A more chilling presence is the Shadow Man, a terrifying dark silhouette frequently sighted in the basement and along the long, empty back corridors. This figure is often linked to feelings of intense fear and dread. Visitors and staff have also repeatedly heard phantom trolleys rattling down empty halls, and the chilling sound of an old-fashioned telephone ringing in rooms where no such instrument exists. The continuous echoes of past emergencies and the solemn dedication of its caregivers continue to play out in this deeply historical and haunted regional hospital. Nine. Riverton Hospital, closed section, Western Australia. Riverton Hospital in Western Australia, particularly its now closed older sections, is a facility wrapped in local urban legend and unsettling history. While less publicly documented than some of the large eastern asylums, its history as a busy suburban hospital over many decades means it was a centralized location for countless deaths, medical trauma, and the complex emotional tapestry of suburban life and loss. Before its haunted reputation grew, the closed section was simply a working wing of a busy hospital. The trauma here was often domestic or accidental: car crashes, sudden heart attacks, and the quiet passing of the elderly. This type of repeated, concentrated death, particularly in the wards and emergency areas that are now abandoned, leaves a powerful psychic energy. As the area was decommissioned and left vacant, the residual activity became more noticeable, with the silence amplifying the unseen disturbances. The paranormal activity reported at the Riverton Hospital's closed section tends to be auditory and deeply disquieting. Staff and security in the vicinity have frequently reported hearing muffled, indistinguishable chatter, or the sound of people moving and equipment clattering coming from the vacant, locked-down wards. These sounds often suggest a full hospital running just beyond the veil of the present. Muffled, indistinct chatter and equipment clatter. The most unnerving incidents involve direct sensory encounters. Security guards have reported seeing shadows moving in the corners of their eyes while patrolling the dark, empty hallways, and occasionally catching the fleeting sight of an apparition of a patient in a pale gown at the end of a corridor, only for the figure to vanish when confronted. Some reports include objects being inexplicably moved or thrown, particularly in the old storage and maintenance areas, suggesting some entities are not just residual echoes, but intelligent, active presences guarding their former domain within the hospital's cold concrete shell. Launceston General Hospital, Old Wards. Tasmania Launceston General Hospital, LGH, in Tasmania, is one of the state's oldest institutions, with its origins stretching back to the mid-19th century. The oldest wards, which are the source of most of the spectral tales, are saturated with the emotional impact of treating severe injuries, endemic diseases, and the routine high mortality rates of the past. These specific wards are not just buildings. They are containers of generations of human pain and medical struggle. The history of the old LGH wards before the hauntings is a story of medical frontierism. The hospital was often the last refuge for the sick and injured from northern Tasmania. The sheer volume of serious, life-threatening cases treated in the early decades ensured that a heavy emotional residue settled into the structure. The sudden deaths, the long battles with consumption, and the desperate surgeries all contribute to an atmosphere where the veil between the living and the dead is perceived as thin, particularly in the oldest, least renovated parts of the complex. The paranormal reputation of LGH is primarily centered on the lingering spirits of former patients. One of the most common reports is the appearance of a little girl who is sometimes seen wandering the corridors of the oldest wards. She is usually described as dressed in simple, older clothes and appears confused or lost before quickly dissolving into the air. She is believed to be the spirit of a child who died tragically young in the hospital. More distressingly, staff have frequently reported experiencing unexplained power fluctuations, lights turning on and off, and the unnerving feeling of a cold breath on the back of their neck when alone in certain areas. Perhaps the most chilling accounts come from the vicinity of the old surgical rooms and morgue, where people have heard unmistakable, agonized groans and whispers emanating from locked, empty rooms, the residual screams of those who passed away in suffering. The enduring sense of sorrow in these old wards is a constant reminder that the work of healing here came at a high and often final price for many.